we're going to walk through behaviors. We're going to talk about it through the lens of autism, but everything that we will talk about, you can apply to kids with any disability or just humans in general, because behavior is just behavior, no matter what it looks like, unfortunately. So behavior change is pretty much the same for all of us. Our rough plan today is to walk through behaviors. I hope you came with a student or three in mind. We're going to problem solve specifically for your students. If you came with a team of people and you share that student or students work together, that's even better. If you're all by yourself, don't feel alone. There are plenty of us that can help you walk through. I will say we are talking about behaviors, which evokes emotions. And sometimes when we hear other people talk about other children, don't take it back, right? I want to say we need to make this, we're not going to share within our privacy information. So just be aware of, don't share that child's name out loud. If you find your sheet, you have a sheet, if you're in person, that says support plan for your target students. The very first thing is give your kid a fake name. So that's the very first thing. It looks like this. It's 2 pages stapled together. And online, if you're online, they were going to send that out through email. If you're at your classroom, you don't have to do a fake name necessarily. You could use initials. You can use a fake name. However works best for you. I just want us to be aware we're talking about behaviors, and they do evoke emotions. Behaviors are hard. So think about that. That's our start. And then just have this paper where you can find it, because we're going to go back to it at a couple of different points across the day, because my goal for you all to walk away with today is a plan, right? When you leave here today, you're going back, and you're taking a plan of, here's what I can do to support this student. Here's how I can go back and make changes so that my November does not look like my October. That's my goal for you all. And I know that I say that knowing how hard behavior change is. So I am Kim Howard, and I work for Kentucky Autism Training Center. I know a lot of your faces. I spent a lot of time in KVEC region, so I've seen a lot of your faces. This is a wild week for me. I'm home about 10 or 12 hours every other day this week. So I'm on a whirlwind training tour. We're going to have people next door, so it's going to be fun. We're just going to bear with all of it. What I do want to know from you guys is, and I will say, I was a classroom teacher, so I have been where you are. I taught for 14 years. I taught moderate and severe disabilities, and the last 7 years I taught what they called a structured unit, and that was for any child with autism or autism-like disabilities. I'm dual certified, LBD and MSD. So if they could pop anybody into my unit, regardless of ability or disability. And I mostly took the kids that were, we were the last stop before psychiatric hospital or a home placement because their behavior was so severe. So I know behavior. I don't know everything, but if you do have something that you want to walk through today or problem solve, I will be glad to do that. We are planning to do a couple of points to where we're going to make some things. KVEC has provided loads of materials for you guys. I'm so excited, and they have some really good door prizes, and we're going to talk through the things that you have, and then we're going to make some stuff, hopefully that will be relevant for you. So as you look at that, think about later on, you won't have time to probably make all of it, but think about the things that would be most beneficial for you to walk out of here already made. So that would be my tip for later. So here's what I want to know from you all. If you are elementary age group, raise your hand. Okay. If you are middle high school, raise your hand. Some of us I know go K through 12, right? If you're middle and high school, keep your hand up. We're going to give you, we have a separate book that's for middle and high school, and it's just for that specific age, right? We're just looking at those students that are aging out of the system. I'll talk a little bit about this book later, but I do want you guys to walk away with that if you're middle and high today, especially. Because as we grow older and we approach 18, the rules change and suddenly that behavior can send you to jail, or can cause lots of other issues. So there's some helpful information for those students that are headed towards aging out of the system. And it's wild how the rules change at 17 versus now you're 18. The law looks different, regardless sometimes of disability, and especially for our students that float on the edge. And when we think about our friends that are autistic, they may be really functional and may not always appear to have a disability. So it's important for them to know how that law is going to shift and change. Okay, that was our starter set. So what is behavior? Behavior is hard, I will say. So making behavior changes takes a long time. Anything that we talk about today, anytime we try to do behavior change for a child, research tells me that for a child with disabilities, for every year of practicing a maladaptive behavior or a socially inappropriate behavior, it takes 6 months of high quality intervention to change behavior, right? For every year. So if your child is 10 years old, your student is 10 years old, and they've been engaging in this behavior for 2 years, it's going to take a year of high quality intervention to change that behavior. Has anybody ever done a diet or decided to exercise? Those are hard, and they are behavior change that we try to do as adults, and it's hard to stick with those for lots of reasons. So what is behavior? We all have behaviors, and behavior is not necessarily positive or negative. It depends on the situation. So screaming, so if I scream in my classroom, that's probably an unexpected behavior. But if I scream in a parking lot because someone is trying to kidnap me, that would be expected behavior, right? So when we talk about behavior with our students, I encourage you to talk about what's the expected behavior, and that was an unexpected behavior, because screaming, depending on the circumstance, might be wholly appropriate. I had a little guy that was in first grade that I said, "Hey, screaming is not okay." And he's like, "Screaming is okay." And I'm like, "What? Screaming is not okay." And I meant screaming is not okay down here in the second grade classroom. But he was right. Screaming is okay on the playground, or if you get a birthday present. He goes, "What happens when I get a birthday present?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, kid, you like to argue." You're right. It is okay to scream if you're happy, but not during reading class in the second grade. That is not the place to scream. So I want you to think about your student or your classroom. I'm assuming that you're here for a reason, or you're online for a reason. Think about what are the challenging behaviors in your classroom. Just want you to keep those in mind today. So what is challenging behavior? It's any pattern of behavior that interferes with or is at risk of interfering with our optimal learning, engagement, or pro-social interactions, right? I like to think about behavior for change most often. I'm thinking about dangerous behavior. I'm thinking about disruptive behavior. I'm thinking about distracting behavior that I can't ignore, or it's so interfering with the other kids. I want you to talk to the people at your table. Talk about what is the challenging behaviors in your classroom. We all have students with challenging behaviors that we have to get started with. Probably you're seeing, we call challenging behaviors lots of different things. Probably you're seeing a variety. I will tell you, I travel across the state of Kentucky. I cover about 1/4 of the state, and behavior is on fire like it's never been, especially for our very young friends, preschool, kindergarten, first grade, our little guys right now. The rate of kids with autism is very high for our very young friends. So we'll talk a little bit about your challenging behaviors across the course of the day, but I want you to think about it. Here are some common things that I see across the state: hitting, kicking, biting, kids that don't work. They come to school, but they do not do work. I don't know what they're doing there, but it is not class work. Kids who do not have emotional regulation, so they're happy, they're sad, they are totally ticked off all in the same 1 minute. It's our kids who are destroying property. We've busted computers and laptops and classrooms, disruptive, screaming outburst, so many more of those types of things. Failure to follow directions is so minor at this point that I'm like, oh, they just didn't follow directions. But it is really hard when you're trying to manage however many students you're trying to manage. And I know that can look like a lot of things. When we think about challenging behaviors, I want you to think about it in MOO. My friend Mandy Carter taught me this. MOO stands for, when we define behavior, it has to be measurable. We have to be able to observe it. So if I am a stranger and I come to your classroom and you tell me, Johnny is having a tantrum, what does that tantrum looks like? Johnny is hitting, kicking, screaming. I need it to be something that I could see if I didn't know the child. And it needs to be objective. We need to be able to put those pieces together. So when I first came into the world of behavior in my classroom many years ago, one of my students that I supported, her measurable, observable behavior was hitting and kicking with enough force to leave a mark. Because she hit and kicked a lot, she was a student who did not have a communication system. She did not have verbal skills. I've known her for about 20 years now, and I've heard her say 3 words in 20 years. All of them were totally understandable and said so appropriately, and she always looks surprised when they come out. But verbal communication was not going to be her strength. So she hit light taps a lot, but we defined it as hit and kicked with enough force to leave a mark, which were bruises. So our average hit and kick was 40 times a day. There were 4 of us. 40 times a day was where we started at. She just beat on us all day long. And that was where we started at with our MOO. So think about your MOO for your student. What would be your measurable, observable objective? And we'll come back to that in a little bit, but I want to give you a little bit of time to resonate with that. All right, prioritizing behaviors for change. You have to pick your battles. With some kids, everything is a battle. So you have to decide what are my priorities right now? And if I'm picking priorities for you, these are usually the places that I start. I pick behavior that is dangerous, or kids that aren't safe for themselves or for others to be around. I pick behaviors that are disruptive. You can't teach. They can't be in a gen ed classroom. Sometimes they're so disruptive, they're disrupting, the special ed classroom. Maybe it's distracting. It's our students that you can't get off of technology long enough. They're so distracted by the iPad that getting them to engage in any kind of learning is almost impossible currently. So those are the places that I prioritize and start. I also think about behavior that is socially inappropriate to the point that it makes them be ostracized from their peers, right? So behavior that makes them stand out so different or is so socially inappropriate that they cannot have successful peer interactions. I have a student that I see on the northern end of the state that is flashing people. We're taking our clothes off. And that is not okay, right? Very young, but he's exposing himself. And he's a very functional kid out in the gen ed classroom, but he has an autism diagnosis. So for me, that has to be a prioritized behavior because the other kids, they don't want to be around him and you can't blame them. So we have to fix that behavior and we have a plan for it. But anyways, all right, so prioritizing behavior. When we're thinking about prioritizing behavior, then we can think about if we have to pick between these 3, maybe they have all of these behaviors, then which one is happening with a high frequency, right? Which one is super intense? Maybe I'm picking the behavior that is very intense. So then duration. Maybe it's a tantrum. I had a student that could tantrum for 2 hours. When he melted down, we labeled it as a meltdown, but sometimes once he melted down, he could not come back. And we would be in meltdown mode for a couple of hours. So it was very intense length and strength of it. Maybe it's the value of it. Maybe this behavior has a high value of we need to pick this behavior because it's the one that's really impacting other people. Maybe it's the behavior that triggers a cascade event, right? Anybody know what your student triggers are? We'll talk about those a little bit later. So thinking about picking those pieces, and this can be hard. So if you need help deciding what is your value today, which one, let us know. There's a few of my good friends in here. There's several of you I see that have had long time behavior experience. We will help you walk through that. So why do challenging behaviors occur, right? This is a question that I get asked a lot. Why does this happen? Why do these things happen? So I will tell you, it's not because most of the time, I will say most of the time it's not because they're trying to drive you crazy. Sometimes it is because kids have learned how to trigger you. Many times, I think we see kids, I see so many reasons why this behavior happens. We put kids in situations that academically they're not prepared for, right? And we don't have any choice in that. None of us have any say or choice in that. We're just trying to deal with the fallout. We put kids in places that kids don't have the social skills for yet, and then we're trying to bridge the gap, right? And then there's loads of other reasons why behavior happens, and we're going to walk through some that it might be. So maybe it's physiological reasons, mental health issues. I'm seeing so many more kids that have anxiety. I don't know if you guys are seeing that, whether they have a disability or not. So many more kids with high anxiety, a lot more teenagers that have serious mental health concerns. Serious issues like bipolar disorder or ADHD on top of an autism diagnosis. The underlying characteristics of autism, which we'll talk about in a minute, and sometimes it's environmental. Environmental, we can have some control over, right? Physiological, there are things that we can put into place, and we just have to walk through some of those things that we can do. So who are our learners? I'm specifically looking at this through the lens of autism. But if your student that you're having the most challenges with does not have autism, that is okay. These strategies apply broadly for all human behavior. We know that for our friends with autism, they have social issues. They may have communication issues, which could be classic communication issues. Maybe they don't have speech at all, or maybe they have lots of good words, but they don't have the right social words to interact well with their peers. Maybe they have repetitive and restrictive patterns of behavior. I saw a child this week that is very young, and she is super high needs of, it has to be done exactly the way she does it every time. She could not get her straw opened, her silverware packet at breakfast opened, and so she's very young. When the adult very correctly helped her, it messed up her sequence of how she did it, and it sent her into a ginormous meltdown. So what do you do in those circumstances? How do we deal with that? Maybe it's sensory differences. Everything is too loud, it's too bright, it's hot, it's cold. Maybe it's inappropriate sensory needs, or just it's their sensory needs, and they have sensory differences that don't fall in line with what this looks like for everyone else. So think about the unique needs of your learner. We know for kids with autism, autism is a spectrum, and that makes it really hard because we see, in my family, I have 7 children, not my personal children, but I have 7 family members who all have an autism diagnosis. We have more than that now. We have multiple family members that have an autism diagnosis in my family. The rate for autism is currently 1 in 36. And that's the national rate of the United States. That rate runs 8 years behind. 8 years behind. So I'm very curious to see what the rate will be when we get the rate of our current kindergartners and preschoolers right now. But the rate runs 8 years behind just based on how they have to get their data. And it comes from a website called ADDAM, A-D-D-A-M. So if you're interested in that more, you can look it up. It's out there. And we know for our friends with autism, it's a spectrum. So maybe they are gifted, or maybe they have a normal IQ, or maybe they fall in 33% of students who have an autism diagnosis have an intellectual disability, right? So they fall with an IQ that will be below 55. That means that 66% of our students that are autistic have a normal IQ scale or above, and are out there in gen ed world where getting supports and it's a new thing in some areas for our gen ed teachers to have our students that have autism out there in their classroom. Maybe they are non-speaking to maybe they have so many words. Maybe they have awkward gross motor skills to maybe they're very agile. Maybe their sensory system is under-responsive, meaning that they are very low response to sensory, or maybe they're super hypersensitive to where they can hear the fan, they can hear the lady next door, they can hear the noise outside, and they don't have the ability to block it out and focus on what we're actually doing today. So we know that autism can be very hard for those reasons. I'm not going to go through eligibility. I'm going to assume your district is taking care of that with you, but we know that it falls under IDEA. When we think about autism, and when you think about any child, every child comes with a backpack. That's our physiological factors. These are the things that you know. Anybody ever have a student that you can tell how the day's going to be based on how they got off the bus, right? Who came to school today based off of how they got off of the bus? These are the things that the kids bring with them from home that we have zero control over, and we just have to figure out how to deal with the fallout of. It could be needs related to their disability. It might be physical health. Maybe they're sick, sad, or tired. Maybe it's mental health needs. Maybe they come from a history of abuse or neglect. We're seeing so many more children that come from families of drug addiction. Grandparents, and I know you guys already know this, grandparents and great-grandparents are raising very young kids. I have a child that we support that is being raised. He is 6 years old, and he's being raised by great-grandma who is 93. What do you do in some of those circumstances? So setting events, which are considered slow triggers, maybe they're hungry, maybe they didn't take their medicine today. Maybe there was a change in schedule. The bus came a little bit later, or when they got in, there was some small difference. Maybe they're in pain. Maybe they had an argument with their parent or a sibling or somebody on the bus, right? So setting events, those are what those are called. So what can we do to figure out challenging behaviors are occurring? So we have to identify the triggers. We have to identify the triggers for our students, who, what, when, and where. These are the things that we're looking for. We're going to talk a little bit about ABCs of behavior, but here is what we're thinking about. Who does this behavior occur with? When does this behavior occur? Where? And what did it look like, right? Those are our key questions. We have to be behavior detectives, essentially. Has anybody ever tried to change behavior without figuring out why the behavior has happened? Me, 100%. Everybody's done it, right? You just automatic response, right? Kid comes in, does something, automatically you flow with whatever your automatic response would be. Punishments work that way, right? And they're not wrong. We're going to talk about evidence-based practices today. When I first came into the world of education, my first year of teaching, I taught high school MSD. Lord have mercy. High school MSD is tough. So I taught high school MSD, and I had 6 students that were autistic, and one who was extremely severe, and who broke me. It literally broke bones before the end of the year. But my special ed director told me to love him. When I asked for help, and I was a fully certified teacher my first year of teaching, I had all the training, all the good information, but I was at the beginning of my career, and I still learn things every day, right? So 20 some years later, I know a lot more than I did now. But when I went to my director of special ed and said, I need help, I'm doing all the things, I'm trying, here's all the things I'm doing, but I'm not, something isn't connecting here, what can I do? My director of special ed's advice was, just love him, Kim. And I'm like, that's really helpful here. He's wiping the floor with me. It's hard to love somebody when they're ripping out your hair out. So I took this job originally because when the opportunity came up, because there was nobody there to support me when I was in my classroom going through this. Does that make sense? Truly, that is why I take on this job. And this is I'm headed to year 11. When I first took it, it was a 1-year grant-based position. So we're at year 11, so I've done this for a few years. And I'm still in classrooms, not every day, but probably three to 4 days a week. I'm in and out of a lot of different classrooms. But yeah, there's so many theories. I don't know why. I'm going to say that I try to fall back on evidence-based practices. And there are some good theories out there. And there's stuff that I'm like, I don't know. I will say for my family, with as many kids as we have, and we have the whole spectrum. We have the whole spectrum, complete from a child that is in a helmet for self-injurious behavior. He's almost 7 foot tall at 13, got away, eloped. They found him, the sheriff, the whole thing. That's my family. To people in my family that also have autism, but have functional jobs. If airplanes fall out of the sky, I know whose fault it might be. People that work in some specialized fields that are very smart, have some really good skills and really good abilities, but also have some challenges and struggles. So I see the whole spectrum at our family reunion, right? So lots of reasons. I don't know why, but my goal for you all today is evidence-based practices. That's what I try to encourage parents with, and to fall back. Because as a parent, I have bought magic beans or things that I thought would really help my child. I paid $400 for a program that I was like, this will revolutionize his life, when we were in 2nd grade and we'd been kicked out of multiple schools, and he was kind of a train wreck of a child with my own kid. And I worked in the field. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, right? I taught in an autism unit, and then when my kid got diagnosed. So here we all are. That would be my goal, is I try to encourage parents back towards evidence-based practices. I don't know. Eventually, those theories may prove out, but as of now, there's no known cause. No known reason for autism to be happening. I do know it's considered a national crisis at this point, with the rate that it is going up and up. Some of that is for different reasons. We do a better job of diagnosing. We've broadened autism. It used to be autism was what I would call, now it's autism level 3, which is your classic autism. So your kids who are, you can spot that kid at 50 feet and they're autistic from 50 feet away, right? To our students that are now autism level 1, were placed in the category of Asperger's syndrome or pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. So they've pushed them together, and they all are on the same, it's a spectrum, right? So it's considered that. So we have to fall back on evidence-based practices for school districts 100%. When I asked my director of special ed and I said, hey, what can I do? She did not have an answer to give me. So that is how this job that I have kind of came about. Was parents in the 90s went to Frankfurt and said, hey, there's this kid with autism and nobody knows what to do with them. And so now we know, and there are some strategies out there that can help and support. But unfortunately, none of it is an easy button. All of it will take long-term follow-up. And by long-term, I mean try that strategy for months and then come back and tell me it doesn't work, because it will take months to change that behavior. So we have to fall back on the ABC contingency. And all of this, does anybody have parents that ask for ABA? They want ABA-based practices. We're seeing a lot of that, and that's not necessarily a wrong thing. Everything that we will talk about today is an ABA-based strategy, right? Everything that we will talk about today falls back into ABA or applied behavior analysis, right? It all falls back into that. So these are all just good research-based strategies. And all of this information comes from, there's a place called National Professional Developmental Center on Autism Spectrum Disorder. And they are a research-based clearinghouse. They look at research opportunities across the world, and they say, here are practices that float to the top and have multiple meaning several research times, several opportunities that they've said, hey, they've gotten the same outcome. Yes, this does work for this group of kids. So that's what we're talking about today. So when we think about behavior, we have to think about it in the terms of ABC, right? Antecedent is what happens before the behavior. The behavior we've already talked about, we have to have it be MOO, right? Measurable, observable, objective. And C is our consequence, what happens after the behavior. If you've ever tried to treat a behavior without knowing these things, then it's highly likely that you will make it worse. You will essentially make the behavior worse accidentally, or you will accidentally reinforce that behavior, because any behavior that occurs over and over is getting that child something that they want, right? It's working for them. It's worked really well for them. For kids with autism and other disabilities, they may not know or understand that when I pull out her hair and she backs out and gets away from me and doesn't make me do that thing I didn't want to do, they may not know that they should care. They don't have the social skills to know, gosh, I hurt her and that's a sad thing. I shouldn't go around hurting people, right? So we have to think about it from that context, and we have to go back to, how can I change this behavior from a research-based practice? So keep this in mind today. We'll refer back to our ABCs a few different times. Every strategy that we'll talk about today is based out of this start. So antecedent is anything that happens right before the behavior. Do you guys think about your student? Do you ever know, I know if I do this thing, then it's going to set that behavior off, right? We all probably have students that we've worked with that, you know, if you introduce the math worksheet, then they are going to melt down. You place a demand or ask them to do something, and it could be lots of things, right? So this example is Nancy cries during reading time when she's asked to work by herself, right? During lunch, when told to shut up by a peer, Bill hits the student. Those are our triggers, right? Our antecedent. What sets it off? What's our consequence, right? Our consequence is the thing that follows it, that happens after the behavior occurs. So when Joe throws his pencil and rips his paper during math, whenever he is given double-digit math problems, Joe is not given another paper and does not complete the work. So the consequences sometimes reinforce the behavior. I have a student that I worked with that he learned that he would go to PE. We include a lot of kids into PE class, right? But PE is one of those crazy places. Lots of things are happening sensory-wise. It's so loud in there, and there's so many different things happening. This kid was included in gym, which I believe in inclusion, and I want that for our kids. He was going down to PE, and some days he would go to PE, and he would be appropriate and engage in the activities, and everything was fine. And some days he would go to PE, and as soon as he walked in the door, he would pick up a basketball and chuck it at someone's head, knocking them to the ground. So they asked me to come in. They had done several things, and they could not connect the antecedent. The antecedent was he goes to gym, right? The behavior was he picks up a ball and he throws it at somebody's head. And if they aren't watching, then they're getting knocked to the ground. And this was, I think, middle school age. The consequence was when he threw that ball and hit them in the head and knocked it to the ground, he got sent to the bleachers to sit. Because reasonably, if you're going to act like that, you cannot participate. When he got to the bleachers, what did he do? He stemmed the whole time. He was so happy to be in the bleachers. So what we found was, when I went and observed, the gym teacher, some days they were going to run laps and play basketball. And on the days that that was going to happen, apparently this child did not want to run laps. Does anybody like to run? Not me, right? I hate running. If I could get out of running, if I'd known that in middle school that I could get out of running by hitting somebody with a ball and I was not socially appropriate, I mean, maybe, maybe some days, right? This particular child, what we found was that the gym teacher, the setting, the location of gym, on days that they were going to play basketball and run laps, he pushed the basketball cart by the door. And so that child had learned when he saw the basketball cart, he's going to have to run laps. And he did not want to run laps. So what did we do, right? And the consequence was appropriate. You're out. But unfortunately, the consequence gave him what he wanted, right? He didn't have to run laps. So for this kid, we put into place, we asked the gym teacher, don't put the basketballs up there, right? We changed the environment by not having the basketballs be at the front. That way he didn't know what was happening. And then we changed the demand on him. Running, I think they had to run like 5 laps around the gym, which is a lot of laps, but which is, you know, a gym expectation. So for this child, we asked him to run 1 lap with a buddy, and then he had to walk 4 laps. So we changed the demand a little bit. That was our, essentially, that was our consequence of our change. So what's the function? When we think about behaviors, we have to think about what is the child trying, what are they trying to get, right? And it comes down to these. We have our problem behavior, and then it comes down to, are they trying to obtain or get something, or are they trying to escape or avoid something, right? And it falls down. We'll talk on down about the categories. So they're trying to get something or get out of something in a broader sense. Most behavior falls back to those things, right? Think about this. If you came to an after-school staff meeting, it's 4 o'clock, you're so done. You want to go home, you have a mountain of laundry and all the things waiting on you. If you could go to your after-school teacher meeting and you could lay down in the floor and cry, and the principal would be like, oh gosh, Miss Howard, you're having such a terrible day. Why don't you just go home? Are you more likely to cry during the next staff meeting or less likely to cry? Reinforcement. When we think about ABCs and we think about behavior change needs reinforcement, and it has to be positive reinforcement. So if I give a child something, I'm not going to take it back because they did something wrong, right? They're not going to earn the next token. They're not going to earn the next M&M, whatever it was, right? Positive reinforcement. Sasha Long says, be the chocolate chip cookie, right? That quote is a little bit something different. Reinforcement for students with autism can be difficult because sometimes their reinforcers are not socially typical. So figuring out, what do kids want? What will kids work for? What does that look like? I had a student that he worked for a picture of me to go away. But his reinforcement was for me to go away. I mean, I could not find anything. And that was his reinforcement. It was for, there was I put a picture, I put a big X. And so I would put that on his first work, and then a picture of me X'd out. Miss Kim will go away. If you want me to go away, let's do this work. So that was his high reinforcement, right? Kids like all kinds of things. And sometimes we know, sometimes we have to pull out the big reinforcer. We're asking that student to do something that's really hard for them. And sometimes we just need the small reinforcer. We're just holding steady. I think about it as, for me, if I said, would you run a mile for $50? Anybody going to sign up to run a mile for $50? Not me. I'm not getting off my couch for $50 to run, right? If I said, would you run 1 mile for $5,000? I would try. I probably can't do it. My leg is going to crumble before I make it that far. But for $5,000, I'll give it a try. I'll be successful. Same thing for our kids. Sometimes they'll do it, you know, for the $50 reinforcer. Sometimes we got to pull out the big guns, and we need the $5,000 reinforcer. If you have a student that you don't know what their reinforcement is today, think about, what do they do if you don't place any demands, right? They come to school and they just float. You're not placing any demands. How do they occupy themselves? What do they do? For a lot of our kids, it's tablet or computer or some sort of electronic thing, and then that can be triggering to try to take that back. So sometimes we can't give that reinforcer, or we have to give that reinforcer at a time of the day to where there's going to be a natural break from it. We're going to go to lunch. You can have it the last 15 minutes before we go to lunch. Or I've had some students that they can have the iPad, but they can't have it until 2 p.m. because once they have it, I'm never getting it back. I'm never going to be able to take it away. So I have to think about, when am I using that reinforcer? It varies. And that's one of those things that you have to know what they want. And figuring that out can be complicated. Sometimes you can ask families, parents, previous teachers. If I have a severe and complex student, I'm keeping a list of reinforcers, right? Because I don't like the same thing every day. I will eat an ice cream sundae for 4 days in a row. I like ice cream. Kim is working for ice cream. But on that 5th day, maybe I'm tired of ice cream sundaes and I need something different, right? Same thing will happen with our kids. They'll love it, they'll love it, they'll love it until they don't. And then you have to find something new. So figuring out that piece, but know what your kid likes. How do we move towards behavior change? So we've talked about defining the behavior, or our move, right? We've talked about physiological and environmental considerations, and we've talked about how do we determine the function, and all of that. We're going to move towards interventions and supports for behavior change. So consider, is this behavior related to a skill deficit? We talked about earlier this morning, sometimes we put kids, students in situations that they don't have the skills for. It's not our fault, right? We're all doing the best that we can. And sometimes kids are out there and they don't have the skills for the environment. Is the student motivated to perform it? Maybe they have the skills, but they don't have the skills in this setting. So it's a performance deficit. For whatever reason, they have it with you. Or anybody ever have parents? I have parents that say they know their ABCs. They don't know them for me at school. I have no idea what they're talking about. I've tried to get them, but I had a parent that told me that, and they're like, they know their ABCs. So I told the parent, I'm like, show me, bring it and show me. And so the parent did. They did know their ABCs with one specific set of flashcards within the context with that parent. So they had the skill, but they couldn't generalize. Right? They could not generalize that skill to other settings, or in that context they didn't know the other ways the alphabet could look. So do they have a functional communication system? If a student does not have a way to communicate, that's my #1 problem solver for most behavior, because pain talks, right? Severe behavior talks. That is the way that our kids will choose to communicate. My kid who hit and kicked 40 times a day with a bruise, she did not have a communication system. She was very young and had so many complex behavior, but she couldn't say, I need a cookie, get out of my face, I need my diaper changed, I want to play with the Play-Doh. And the way she said it was, she punched us every time. She punched us. That was her communication, unfortunately. So how might our relationships be influencing behavior? The way that we respond to kids, and I say that knowing how hard that is. We have to have a game face, right? We need a game face. We need a game face when dealing with our kids. And it can be very hard to go back into a classroom setting after you've had a major event. I tell people, we'll talk about this more at the end of the day, but if you're having severe outbursts, I recommend that you decompress with your staff at the end of the day. The other people that were involved, you walk through, what could you have done different? What happened? Like just the pieces of it, because you guys need time to breathe and live and reflect. And I will say, if you're dealing with students who have severe and complex needs, you need to phone a friend. You need a helpline, somebody else in your building. And we'll talk about emergency plans later on, but you need some friends that have the training and can come and support you in times of severe need, because we all have bad days and we all are human and are sick, sad, and tired. We all have those needs. So if we're talking about a can't do versus a won't do, right? So challenging behaviors are more likely to arise when the demands from a student is a skill that child doesn't possess, right? Or it's a skill or a behavior that they don't have the motivation to exhibit or the skills to generalize. So know that automatically. If I'm looking at a kid and they're engaging in some kind of behavior, one of my first thoughts is this a skill? Is there a skill missing that I need to teach them so that they can then engage in appropriate behavior? Or is this a skill that they either don't have the motivation, whatever behavior they're engaging in gets them what they want in a more easy fashion versus doing this socially appropriate, or is it they haven't been able to generalize it, right? So I've taught the child how to participate. So I'll use this. I taught social skills. I don't know if you guys do Fun Friday. I did Functional Friday. Because my kids did not watch TV. There's no TV watching in my students' lives. They weren't super game oriented, like video game stuff. So we taught social skills on Friday. We did our normal schedule, but then there was a chunk of the day that we engaged in card games or board games or some sort of adaptive play to where there was a my turn, your turn, some turn taking and some different parts of engaging in social skills. And what I found was that I had kids who had really good skills for engaging in that play in my setting, but we hadn't generalized it. So I had to start, because I let them go up to their classrooms when they were doing some board games, and it went down like a ship. My ship sunk. They didn't have the skills out there in the gen ed world, but they had them with me, and I figured out I hadn't generalized it, right? They had the skill, they knew how to do it, but they could only perform it in the context of my classroom at my kidney table with me and the students in my classroom. So we started bringing in gen ed kids from the outside and having them participate. And we started having other adults lead that time so we could build in generalization for them, right? Does that make sense? That's the piece that I want you to take away. So challenging behavior, thinking it through. The student has not acquired the behavior skills related to meet academic. It could be, these are just ideals of sample interventions. So if this is a skills deficit, this side is a performance deficit. So if I have a student who has a skills deficit, I'm going to think about social skills training. We're going to talk about emotional regulation training this afternoon, anger management, executive functioning skills. Anybody teach executive functioning explicitly, right? We have to consider that for our students. Executive functioning skills are the skills that help us hold our entire life together as functional adults. It helps us get places on time, all of those pieces. And there is a burst of growth for students around early elementary school. And then there's a burst of growth around around middle school age. We have to explicitly teach those skills for our students. They will not learn them through osmosis by watching other kids, right? Because our typically developing students pick up these kind of skills by watching their family. So when mom gets mad, how does mom handle being mad, right? When we think about it, social skills, executive functioning skills for our peers, our typically developing students, are learned a lot of times by watching others around them. For our friends with autism, they don't know to imitate. They don't know to watch the others around them, and those are the behaviors that they need to engage in. So we're going to have to teach them explicitly. If this is a performance deficit, meaning that I've taught the skill and the child knows how to do the skill, but they need some more motivation, then I can go to that second category, which is I can think about a behavior contract. Maybe I'm doing check-in, check-out. I have some students that have a lot of attention-seeking behavior that we're doing some good things with check-in, check-out. That it's kind of give them that adult attention in a more socially appropriate way. They're super seeking out adult attention. So we went to some check-in, check-out procedures for them. Maybe it's teaching them to self-monitor. Maybe it's positive peer reporting. So those are some places you can start if you think it's a skill or a performance deficit. So think through, how is the student communicating? If the student does not have a communication system, 100%, that's where we have to start. We know that if a child leaves elementary age, if they leave elementary school, and I'm talking K through 5, I know a lot of you guys go K through 8. If they leave the 5th grade and they don't have a functional communication system, it's 10% chance that they will ever get one. Think about that terrible statistic for a minute. If they leave 5th grade and they don't have a functional communication system, data tells us the odds that they will ever get a functional communication system by the time they hit middle school and high school, it's under 10%. Under 10%. So we have to super focus on communication in those early years. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? I don't know if anybody's a speech therapist in here, and you don't have to raise your hand, and I'm not calling you all out, but speech therapists drop kids. It's district policies. We drop kids when they hit middle school and high school age. And as a classroom teacher, I don't have the skills always or the resources to come up with a functional communication system, right? So it's a dual problem that happens. So know that. Do know there's a program called TALC, T-A-L-L-C or T-A-L-C-C. It's through the HDI, which is out of UK. And if you Google TALC HDI or you message Stephanie or I, they offer a virtual problem solving. They meet monthly, and you can submit your student that you are struggling to come up with a communication system. You need parent permission and school district permission, right? And you're coming on there with a team, hopefully special ed teacher, gen ed, possibly classroom assistant, parents if they're willing, and they will pay the special ed teacher a stipend to join that. And you are presenting your student and their needs, and they will help you problem solve a communication system for that student. And they used to have money and funding that if it was something that they had, they would help you make a connection to how to get it, right? And the other thing that I found out about communication in the last month that I was shocked by, does anybody have, and you don't have to raise your hand, I'm just gonna say, I know there are students out there that probably need some sort of communication device, which costs thousands of dollars. It's $10,000 or $20,000. And even if they have Medicaid pays for 80% if your school district bills that. But here's the trick I found out. Best thing I found out this in the past, I don't know, in the last 2 months. Here's what I found out was you can go, and I'm not promoting Tobii Dynavox. I'm not getting paid by them. And I don't have any relationship to them. But I found out that you can go to a place like Tobii Dynavox and connect the parent directly to Tobii Dynavox. And if they have a medical card, it will pay for 100% of the device that the Tobii Dynavox evaluation says they need. Do you know that? I didn't know that. I found that out in the last month. Isn't that revolutionary? I mean, it is, because school districts, I mean, how do you come up with, 20% of $20,000 when you've got 100 other kids who also need it? I get it. So, but if your student has a medical card, I don't know how it works for insurance. I don't know that it works for insurance. But if your student falls under Medicaid, then you can make a connection between the company and the parent, and that company will walk the parent through and take care of all of the billing, and then they can send that device to school with them. And then Tobii Dynavox, with the parent permission, can share with you the evaluation, and the school district can build it in at that point. I did not know that was possible, but it is something that is possible and worth knowing about. You need district permission, right? I would always check with my school district and make sure that they're okay with that, right? Everything I'm telling you today, you always want to make sure you have your in-district level permission, because that can look different from place to place. And I don't want to do something that gets you in trouble. But I know that if you connect them to the Tobii Dynavox people, you can be a third-party communicator in there. You're allowed to be a part of the conversation, but it takes that cost, the challenge of coming up with that cost off of the school district, which I know is a problem sometimes. So worth knowing about, worth having a conversation about with your district. I don't know if it works for other companies besides Tobii Dynavox, and it might very well, but I do know it can happen for them. So if you have students in that position, it's worth knowing that that is an option, or at least a possibility, if your parents are willing. And they can come to the school to do the assessment. If the parent is not comfortable, or they can meet at a library, you know what I mean? They don't have to go into the parent's home if that's an issue, because for parents that might be, they might not want a stranger coming into their home. But there's some wiggle room and some options that take that burden of the finance off of the school district. All right, so when's the best time to teach a new skill? When kids are calm, right? We have to teach from a place of calm. If we think about the escalation cycle, I have seen people try to teach something at peak, and it doesn't go well, right? Kids are not going to be able to process. We're going to walk through some strategies. We're going to talk about antecedent-based interventions, right? So antecedent-based interventions are interventions that take place before we have a behavior problem. 90% of your effort for behavior change has to take place before the behavior happens, right? Once you've been slapped, what can you do? Right? Once aggression has happened, once something like that's happened, what you can do about it? You ride out the storm at that point, right? Your goals change once the behavior is happening. It's too late. So 90% of our intervention has to be focused on the antecedents. How do we change what happens before the behavior occurs? And I will tell you, as I go across the state, there are certain baseline things that I look for kids that are autistic. Here are the things that should be in place, right? I look for visual supports. 100%. Where are the visual supports? If I go in and their experience is the same as all the rest of the kids in that classroom, they don't have anything extra, they're in special ed. They should have some extra. There should be some things in place for them, right? I go across the state, and a lot of times when I go in to intervene and look at behavior, that student has minimal things in place. Not always. Sometimes they've done lots of things and the behavior is still occurring. So it can be both. But our biggest effort has to focus on how do we prevent the behavior. And no matter how fabulous you are, you will never prevent 100% of behavior, right? You might have the best program in the world. Behavior will still happen. People will have a bad day, right? So don't think I'm saying behavior never occurs. It will. So how do we have strategies to address the background setting, right? How do we alter if we're thinking about our physiological, our things before kids come in? So if I'm thinking about history of abuse and neglect, I'm thinking about trauma, mental health needs, I'm looking at resources within my school district. Do I have mental health resources within my building? Maybe I have an outside agency, like Comprehend, Mountain Comp. I don't know what it is in this region. Maybe I have those agencies within my school building, and I can get my student counseling services if they're able to do that and that's appropriate. I'm going to think about maybe I have a really phenomenal school counselor, and that counselor is willing to put some things into place. I know we have some school districts that have that. I'm going to look for those resources. I'm going to start there. I'm thinking about if I have students who have physical health, or maybe it's they're hungry, right? And you guys know your school districts have we have the backpack program, and we have other things in place that we're trying to address some of those outside school problems, but we won't be able to prevent all of them, right? So we're going to talk mostly about what do we do at school? How do we control school? Because that is the one place that we do have control. So think about the environment and think about the schedule, right? What might we need to change in the schedule? I had a student that when we looked at it, the people that was with him said he was melting down all morning. And when we went and we actually took some data, he was really melting down from about 9:45 until about 10:45. 9:45, he would just start going downhill. And for about that hour until lunch happened, he was melting down. And so we altered his schedule by putting a snack in place. He had a snack at 9:40. I know that sounds easy, but for that kid, he honestly, he needed a Snickers, right? He was hangry, and sometimes hangry matters. He needed a Snickers at 9:45. We didn't give him a candy bar, right? But we did give him a snack. The rest of my kids did not necessarily have a snack, but he sure did because he needed that. Maybe it's changing the environment. Antecedent-based intervention, one of those is changing the environment. I have a student that runs away. Elopement, anybody have kids that run away? Oh, elopement is so hard, right? But if I have a student that elopes, I'm thinking about how can I change the environment? How can I make it harder to run out of my classroom? So in my classroom, I narrowed the doorway. I didn't block it because I don't want to get trapped in there for fire code, but I put a cabinet. I made an entryway within my classroom. I put a cabinet here that blocked easy access. It gave me an extra 2 seconds as I wore my running shoes to run that student down before they made it out the door, right? I thought about how can I change my environment? That student's desk was the far end, as far away from the door as I could get him. His area was the far back of the classroom because I had to think about how can I change the environment to contain him because he was trying to escape pretty regularly. Other antecedent interventions, use learner preferences. That's a really good one. Think about what is this child like? How can I use what they like to get them to do what I want them to do? So maybe I'm counting Bluey characters, right? I work with elementary age. Bluey, the cartoon. I have a student that loves Taylor Swift. So they were supposed to be doing a paper, and she is an alternate assessment student. Her paper was about Taylor Swift, right? Her information that we were looking up was about Taylor Swift. Was she interested in Taylor Swift? Yes. The rest of the class was writing about a different person. I think they were writing about a famous person in history. She did not care about a famous person in history, right? But for the context of that activity, it didn't matter. The goal was some sort of written paper, right? Maybe I'm implementing a pre-activity intervention. So a pre-activity intervention is, I had a student that I worked with that was in the 4th grade, and she was out in the gen ed classroom most of the day. Pretty much all of the day. She only came to me for 20 minutes before the start of the school day, and we did pre-activity intervention for math. We talk about skill deficit. Her math skills were 4 years behind her peers, right? 4 years behind her peers. The rest of her skills, for students with autism, we get splinter skills, right? Sometimes they're really fine here, but they're not really fine here. And sometimes they have this amazing skill that you're like, where did this come from? But then over on this, so for this kid, the rest of the day was fine, but her math skills were very low compared to her peers. She was out in the gen ed classroom. Could she do 4th grade math? No. No, she could not, and it gave her high anxiety. So every day before the start of the school day, she came to me and we spent 25 minutes in the library, and I pre-taught her whatever the 4th grade math lesson was that day. Just me and her for 20 minutes. We started at 7:15 in the morning. But it helped her to be able to cope. And there can be lots of other options for pre-activity interventions. That's just one example. It could be choice making, giving kids choices. I think about adult controlled choices. Choices are powerful, right? Choices give back the power to the person. When you have a disability, frequently your choices are limited. So think about the places in your day that you can give back choices to your students. We're about to do a writing activity. Are you going to use the purple pencil or the yellow pencil? I don't care, as long as we write, right? Are you going to write with the ink pen or the marker? I had a kid who was on a no sharps. They could not have a sharp object because they would try to stab me. So are you writing with a marker? Or are you writing with a crayon? Are you writing with, what are we using that was not a pencil? I had a student that had oppositional defiant disorder and autism. So when he would come into the classroom, are you sitting in the desk on the left side or the right side? He had 2 desks. It didn't matter to me. We figured out how to give back the choices. I had a student that was very autism level 3, lots of cognitive issues. he worked in a structured workstation. Anybody use structured workstations? Yeah, so he worked in a structured workstation. We also did structured work during teacher time. So we had the same setup of 3 work baskets, but instead of being alone in a work cubicle, he would be at a table with me. We used the same structure. I started letting him on activities that weren't sequential. It didn't matter what order we did them. I started letting him look in the baskets to see what the work was. And I thought, when I first heard about using choice making, I thought, this kid, he can't make a choice. I'll try it, but I think this is hokey. And so I tried it with him, and he looked. He looked in those activities and picked them apart, and he put them back in the basket, and he chose which one he wanted to do first. And the cool thing for me was I accidentally got information. I figured out that every time there was a writing activity, he chose that last. Every time there was an activity that had glue, he chose that first. Apparently, he really liked to glue things. So I found an accidental reinforcer that I wouldn't have picked up on otherwise. So giving him back some choices actually gave me some information about them. Alter how instructions are delivered. Maybe this is a student who is out in gen ed all day, and I need to highlight on a worksheet the important information that they need. There's a whole paragraph of directions, but really they need to know this one line. That's where the highlight reel is, and somebody needs to highlight that information for them. Maybe I'm altering the instructions by making it a visual support. Maybe I can't give them a verbal instruction. Words disappear, right? So I need to figure out, how do I make this visual? And you guys have some cue cards, right? One of the things that you picked up today was a set of cue cards. Those cue cards are literally visual instructions for the adult to the student. Maybe I need to think about my sensory environment, and we'll talk a little bit about sensory later. I'm thinking about preferences. We've talked a little bit about preferences, so I'm going to skip this one. When we're thinking about learners' preferences, here's their examples. We're thinking about, it was a student who loved monster trucks. So they used monster trucks in their math problems, right? We're using a Batman pencil for writing activities. Think about, what does your student love? One of my kids, we used cows and keys. She loved cows. And so in her structured work area, a couple of times a month, I would print a different picture of a cow, just random cow pictures, and put it up in her work environment because it would make her more motivated to go in there. And she liked those pictures of cows. Sometimes if we were counting things, we counted cows. Or if it was just a random worksheet that we were working on, I would put a cow sticker on it because it didn't have anything to do with what we were doing, but she liked it and I needed her to be happy. And that was one of the ways that we figured out how to do it. In this case, they added Disney Princess. So this was a student that was Disney Princess, and so they added Disney Princess. They also highlighted in different colors the important parts of the directions that the student needs. So that's one example. Another example, another thing for antecedent-based intervention is predictable routines and schedules. So thinking about, how do we support a student schedule? How do we support, does anybody in here do master schedules? Is anybody MSD type units? Yes. So in my classroom, we have what I call a master schedule. So a master schedule literally was something like this. It's every child's name at the top. And I did 15-minute increments across the day, right? That master schedule says, here is where Alex is at 10 o'clock. I know he's doing hygiene. The other kids might be doing something different, but it literally was my whole day schedule for the adults laid out. Master schedule helps hold my life together. When we're thinking about routines, if we're thinking about routines across our day. So what is a routine? A routine is something that we engage in pretty often. So lining up, walking through the lunch line. A routine might be, how do your kids, how do you arrive to the classroom? How do you exit the classroom? The routine could be, maybe you do centers. Maybe the routine is, how do you rotate from center to center? Does that make sense? If you're elementary age, you're going to spend 50% of your day in everyday routines. 50% of your day, you're doing those same routines over and over. For students with autism, we have to go back and teach them explicitly. If we have a break longer than 2 days, you need to review your rules and routines. Routines for our students with autism will help decrease anxiety. Have you ever been in an after-school training and you don't know how long it's going to be, and the person keeps talking, and you're like, I'm never getting out of here. I don't know when this is going to end. When can I leave, right? Same thing for our students. The more that they don't know what to expect and what's going to happen, the more likely they're going to live in anxiety. They're going to be upset and stressed out about it. So if we develop strong routines, then that will decrease anxiety. And we have to teach them explicitly. I do have a kindergarten classroom that I worked with that videotaped. She called them her star students, and she took us a couple of months, and she asked 3 or 4 ringer kids that knew the routines, and she videotaped short clips. Here's how we do it. Here's how we transition during centers. Here's how we put up our backpacks. Here's how we line up on the red square. Like all of the routines for her kindergarten classroom for a whole year. And then she showed them when the classroom it ended up being about a 5 or 10 minute video that she's still using like 4 or 5 years out. Those kids are now 4th, 5th, 6th grade, but she's still using it. And it's essentially video modeling of other kids, but they're teaching the incoming kindergartners. Here's how you line up. Here's how you get a drink of water. Here's how you transition, all of the pieces. So she plays that video. They have a 5-minute wait until gym time. They have a few extra minute times that she needs a time filler. She throws that video on. It's a bell ringer time, and they've come back from Christmas break, and they've been off of school for 2 weeks. And so now all of the kids need a reminder. She pulls that out and plays it. There's a few options that you can do for kind of reinforcing and teaching those routines. Visual schedules. When I talked about baseline things for students with autism, if you have a student who does not transition from activity to activity, if you have a student that some days they don't cope well at school, they are not coping, you cannot get them to do any work, the number one thing that you have to think about is a visual schedule. It's kind of like a baseline defense for antecedent-based intervention. It's a good place to start. Visual schedules can look like 1,000 different things. It could just be written words, right? It can be written out. It could be electronic-based now, where there's some great, I have some great high school students that are using an iPhone that have their schedule essentially on their iPhone that they can pull out. Or it could be picture-based. I don't care what it looks like as long as it works for that child or student and it works for you all. Lots of good options. Maybe it's an activity schedule. An activity schedule kind of breaks us down to, it's essentially a mini schedule. So I've made it to reading. What does reading look like? I had a student that, and these are almost like a routine schedule, right? I had a student that he needed to know what was going to happen every minute of the day. Maybe it's written on the board, right? Some students will do fine with that. I have a preschool classroom that I'm working with that she has the picture-based visual schedule up on a cabinet, and the student's picture is on a magnet, and they move the student's picture down as they go throughout the day. It works really well. For that particular child, it's working really well. So it doesn't have to be something that they hold in their hand, or maybe it does. Just kind of depends on what that student will function with. Other things to think about are going back to pre-activity intervention. I talk through my slides, you all. I do this all the time. Maybe it's giving kids warnings of transitions, right? We're about to transition, and if pretty soon, 20, 30 minutes, lunch will be here, right? We're going to have lunch. So maybe it's a warning of, hey guys, recess is about to be over. In 5 minutes, we're going to clean up and move on to the next activity. Maybe it's a warning of schedule changes. You guys have a card. I should have taken a set of the printables. You guys have a card that says schedule, it says change of activity, right? Yours looks like this, a change alert, right? You're telling the student that something different is coming. I had a student that, anybody have a student that if the schedule changes, then there's a meltdown. If you have a student that melts down when the schedule changes, you have to have a visual schedule and you need a change alert. The way that I teach this is my student that I realized that I had a student that when he first came to me, he knew our routine within a week of school. Internally, he knew the routine. Picture day came. Oh my gosh, picture day came. What happens on picture day? 750 kids get their picture taken at my school. They're not going to be out of the gym in time. We had a gym. The gym teacher went to lunch and we had the gym to ourselves for my kids that could not do PE with peers. We had the gym to ourselves for about 40 minutes. This kid loves gym. On picture day, I was trying to say, there's no gym today. I'm so sorry. I got a broken nose. That's what I got, right? He headbutted me right in the face. Guess what happens? Picture day comes again. There's a picture day in the fall and there's one in the spring. Horrifically, I knew that I had 6 months to figure out how to get him not to break my face. The next time picture day come around again. So for that 6 months, if you have students that struggle with schedule changes, the way that I taught it was that in the beginning, the schedule changes were positive for him. So they were things that he liked. So I did not touch gym. Gym was not a touchable thing. I did not change the schedule for gym. So what I did do was, right now, we're doing 30 minutes of math. We're doing a math activity. We delayed, I said, math is delayed by 5 minutes. Surprise, math is delayed by 10 minutes. And he could do some sort of reinforcement activity, right? So in the beginning, the schedule changes were very positive, right? Hey, right now, we're ending math early and you get to do something positive. This kid particularly did not like math. All of our kids. I didn't do that often, right? I'm not trying to cheat math time. We did things like change alert, a surprise. Our surprise was, do your students like to open things or to watch things be opened? So many little kids in the YouTube videos watching things be opened. This guy likes to watch things be opened. So surprise, he would get a package and we would open it. And that was the surprise. And then we would go on with our schedule. So it only took a few minutes. And then over time, we delayed gym, right? Gym was pushed back by an activity in front of it, a short surprise activity or something that he less liked. So over time, we started changing. So spring came back around and it was picture day again. And I thought about calling in sick. And I had talked to my principal. I really did think about calling in sick. I was like, I've got a call. Might not be able to come today. My poor people that I worked with, I had really good assistants that I loved. So I couldn't do that to them because I knew they'd be the one trying to duke it out with him if that's what we came down to. So we went back in, I pulled out my change alert, I put it on the schedule and I said, hey, Jim, and I did the same choices that I had offered in the fall. In the fall, when I had said there's no gym, but he didn't know this visual yet. I had to teach the visual, right? No gym, but we could walk. We had a bicycle. He could ride a bicycle on the track like a trike, or he could go up to the playground. The same choices that I offered in the fall. This time, he cried a little. He wasn't happy about it, but there was no violence, right? He was able to choose one and move on after a minute or two of crying and me praying in the background. Lord, please, make an appropriate choice and do this today. No more broken noses. All right. Those are our pre-activity interventions. And there's others. Priming for success. Priming is telling kids what they need to know right in the minute, right when they're doing it. So I primed my classroom by, our playground did not have a fence. We were surrounded by an electrified barbed wired fence that contained a bull. At the last school that I taught at, they had a bull in the field by the playground. Occasionally the bull got out onto the playground and you had to like pre-check for the bull. No kidding. You guys have bears. We had to check for the bull. He's a big old bull. And of course, when the kids come to play on the playground, it comes to the fence and he's huge. And then my kids are over there with the electric fence that has barbed wire. So the rule for my classroom was right before the fence was this beautiful stretch of grass that was perfect for running on and playing kickball. But for my students, we said, no, you cannot be on the grass at all because the temptation of the bull and the electric fence was too much. I couldn't take having to call parents and be like, I'm sorry, Johnny got a little bit shocked today. Self-correcting behavior, touch the fence, I'm sorry. I don't know, but here we are. So I did not want to have to do that. So the rule for my classroom was we do not play on the grass. And it was the rule for all of primary. None of primary was allowed to play on the grass. So I taught that by priming my students by saying we only play where the wood chips are. So at the beginning of the school year, I would go out and get myself a box, a little small Tupperware container of wood chips. I would bring the wood chips in as we were getting ready to go out to recess, and I would say, guys, the rules for playground is we only play where the wood chips are. Now for my students, they all held a wood chip. Everybody looked at what a wood chip was because I wanted to make sure that we were clear. The first few weeks of recess, we walked the limits of where they could play. And I had a punishment. For me, if you step into the grass, then you come and stand with me because it was a safety rule it was a critical safety rule. The bull was scary and the fence was electrified. I don't want to be shocked. So that was how we primed and that was how we taught. But you can use priming for lots of things. Anybody, we do this automatically. When anybody walk into church, what's the things that you say to your family? For mine, we're chronically late. And I say, guys, we got to go in quiet. Shh. We got to be quiet when we go in. Slip into the back, right? We prime all the time. We do this as functional adults. We just have to do it more explicitly for our students with disabilities. So think about, when do you need to tell your students the rules right before they go? I did this for my kids when we were walking into a gen ed classroom, right? We're about to go up. They're joining their peers into a gen ed classroom. And I would say, remember, Miss Francis hates it when you talk out loud. You got to raise your hand. And a few teachers, they did not tolerate kids that just talked when they had a question. You had to raise your hand, right? Maybe you have different things that you need to prime for. Think about that for your kids. You're telling them the rules. Maybe you're going one step further. I added a visual, right? I added the wood chip. Maybe you need some sort of visual support to help communicate that, or maybe you need some sort of real life piece to communicate that. But lots of things that you could think about for priming. So predicting success. So this is a contingency map. Anybody ever use a contingency map? I love these, and they are essentially like a souped up first in board. A contingency map you take the top. So this box is kind of your trigger or what's about to happen. The green is the pathway you want them to take. The red on the bottom is the pathway that is the maladaptive behavior, right? So in this case, when I'm working with the teacher, the behavior that the student is engaging in, they're running away. They didn't ask for a break. So they did not get access to the beanbag chair, which was what they were running away to, right? The top is the pathway of how do they get what they want? How can I get to the beanbag chair? Well, if they want to get to the beanbag chair, then when they're working with the teacher, I can raise my hand and ask for a break. Then they can get a break in the beanbag chair, right? We do these in our heads as functional adult. This one is mine. Currently, my car is on 3 miles to empty. As a functional adult who drives all over the state, when the gas light comes on in my car, I continue to drive without gas. I have a problem, you all. It's a real problem. My husband has a strategy. We now have 10 gallons of gas in jugs at our house because he knows that I have a problem. That's how I know he loves me, right? 25 years later. When I run if I continue to drive without gas, what happens? I run out of gas. My husband is mad at me. I have to call AAA and they think I'm an idiot because here I am, I don't have any gas. And I kept on driving my car, but I'm so tired of going to the gas station. If I was a real functional adult, and I promise you today, I will not drive from Hazard because there's no cell phone signal to call for help. I will get gas. When the gas light comes on, I'm going to look for the nearest gas station and then I can make it home. We do these in our head, right? On the weekend, I think to myself, all right, self, it's the weekend. I need to clean my house. If I don't clean my house, then on Monday I have no clean clothes, right? And my dishes are piled to the sky. If I clean my house, then on Monday I have clean clothes and I've done maybe my food prep or whatever I was going to do that week, right? We do these in our heads, so we need to do them more explicitly for our students with autism. You're going to have access to a bunch of blank ones. It's kind of a souped up first in board. I use them for my students that I can do a little bit of reasoning with. I can do a little bit of, hey, here's what you want. Here's how you get it. This behavior that you're doing does not get you what you want. I do like them for that. Other types of antecedent-based interventions are advanced warnings, giving kids some sort of, hey, we're about to shift. Maybe it's a visual timer. Anybody use time timers? They have their app was free in August on, I don't know if it's still free. You can go online and look and see time timer. There's 1,000 different versions. You can do a visual countdown. It could be cards, whatever it is, right? Whatever works for you and your student. But think about for kids with autism and kids with ADHD, they get something called sticky time. Has anybody ever heard of that? Their feelings and their sense of how time flows is not accurate. So something that really took 2 minutes might, for them, have felt like it took an hour. Or they've been playing on their reinforcement and they love that, but they've been on it for 20 minutes and now it's time to give it up. But for them, it feels like they've been on it for just 1 or 2 minutes. So giving some sort of visual timer, visual countdown to when activities are ending will help support that. Rules and expectations. How do we teach these explicitly? Having some sort of visual, thinking through what your rules are and what your routines are before your kids come. Some students with autism will develop their own routine with the first time they do something with you. So if you're getting a new student, it's the start of a new year, you know something's not working this year, think about how you can change that. Christmas break comes up, you've had a little bit of a break. It's easier to change routines after a little bit of a break to come back. So thinking through what they are and how are we teaching them for our students. There are tons of different visuals out there that you can get. I like the ones that are on the desk for our kids that need that. Behavior momentum is one of my favorite things when we think about it for kids with disabilities. Kids with disabilities frequently experience failure. I will say I am a crochet failure. I wanted to learn to crochet. I was all excited. I've tried to learn to crochet multiple times. I can only crochet a rope. I can make a rope 100 feet long. I cannot make that thing into anything functional. So do I keep on trying to crochet? No, I quit, right? I gave up. I was like, I'm a crochet failure. It's time to give up. The same thing happens for our students with school. They come to school and they try to be successful, but they experience high rates of failure. And school is a weird context. For the rest of their life, probably they can choose to quit things, right? If I suck at crochet, I can quit that with no consequences, but I can't quit school, right? I have to come back. So behavior momentum says, pick something that you know the child can do. Think about ways to give them built-in success so that they are having some success. So think about easy or toss-away demands. For some of my students, my thing was clap your hands, because that was the skill they had. They could clap their hands. For one of my students that I was working with, we were learning colors. She knew the color red and blue. So we identified the colors red and blue before we moved on to colors she didn't know. For my child that we were pre-teaching math every day in the pre-teaching of math, we would start out with 1 or 2 really easy math problems that I knew she would get 100% before we moved on to the problems that she was not going to be able to do. Because I needed to remind her, hey, you can do math. You can do math. You can do it. So think about throwaway demands. Essentially, that's what behavior momentum is. It says you think about a series of high probability requests, things that you know the student is likely to do before you ask them to do things that are going to be really hard for them. Knowing what we know, that I can't quit school. I got to come back. Even if I'm at school, if school isn't good for me or I'm not good at school, I still have to come back tomorrow. So know those things. Simplify the activity. You guys do this all the time, thinking about how do we break this activity down. Has anybody, so task and analyze, anybody used Magic School? Yeah. So Magic School and a few of those like ChatGPT, a few of those AI. I'm not a technology wizard at all. I'm like a technology baby crawling through trying not to fall off the cliff. But Magic School AI or ChatGPT, both are free and both have, you can task analyze. It will break it down for you. And then you need to look at it and maybe edit it or make sure that it's appropriate. And you can pick hard, easy, medium. It'll let you pick different settings. They also have some really cool options on there to build your social stories for you. They both have some really cool free options for building social stories. So know that those resources are out there for you. Provide visual directions. I tell people that any words that I have to say over and over, I need a visual for that because I'm having to say it over and over. Obviously, that kid is not verbally comprehending that, or they're losing the words. Words disappear, right? I have a student that we're working with is kicking people. Well, what's an incompatible behavior with kicking? Feet on the floor. So he has a prompt card for feet on the floor. I can't kick people if my feet are on the floor. So they prompt him, feet on the floor. We have a card for that. I have a student that we have a prompt for nice hands, and he's been taught that nice hands means he puts his hands on his hips. He's a student that grabs and hurts people. We needed a prompting card for nice hands. I don't want to say don't grab people, right? I want to tell him what to do. Nice hands. And he's been taught to put his hands on his hips. So thinking about those pieces, how do we provide visual directions? Sensory supports are cool. And I'm going to see if I can go to this website. So this website is from us. We are Kentucky Autism Training Center. You can Google us. We have several different resources, but this sensory page, okay, this is free and it's from us at Kentucky Autism Training Center. If you go there, there's just general information. But if you go to the side, there are visual supports for supporting sensory. There are school sensory resources. And we've just started building this. But there you can find things like a classroom accommodation checklist, a sensory diet sample. You can find lots of different information that might support your students who have sensory needs. There's also information for home. If you have families that are at the point they want some help and strategies, anybody have students that have challenges with eating, either overeating objects or not eating any food at all, there's some information for feeding on there. And there are also some video clips that are related to sensory. And most of these are around eating. So if you go to their sensory visual supports, you're going to find some social stories. You're going to find a sensory choice board and some sensory desk strips.